Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Well, good morning. I have to confess I'm not a printmaker often. I've learned more about printmaking in the last few months working with Kip and Alan, his assistant, than in the rest of my life. I've made etchings in the past, but screen prints were new to me, and I had a wonderful, wonderful time with Kip. But as I'm more a sculptor and a draftsman than a printmaker, I thought I'd show a few examples of work, some which you'll be familiar with. This is at Churchill College, a piece called Southern Shade, named for what it says really, the strong light in the south of France. Drawings I make which aren't very well known because I don't exhibit them much. They were shown a few years ago at the Royal Academy. But normally they're things I do for my own pleasure and amusement, also explorations of structures. These are trees, umbrella pines, I drew in the south of France. And the deep shade they evoke and form wasn't illustrated by the sculpture you saw earlier, but they're sort of connected. These are the palms. They're also from the south. But as you see, they're very conventional drawings. I do them to explore places I visit often, places I go to occasionally. The other place which I visited a lot is Switzerland, where I walked and make drawings and think. And I always carry a notebook, and in that notebook I make drawings of places, ideas for sculptures. This is a mountain of which I'm very fond. I must have made 100 drawings of it. It's on the border of Switzerland and Italy. It's called Pismania. This is also Switzerland, but it's very different. It's a vineyard. This is a place called Solio, and it's a small hill town nearly into Italy, still in Switzerland, where it overlooks, looking down into the valley. It's the valley of the Bergell, where Giacometti was born and lived. So those are things I do which aren't for the public gaze, but I thought they might be interesting to give another indication of my practice. This is also in Cambridge. It's a piece called The Now. In my notebooks, I make little jottings of, it might be music I hear, it might be phrases, it might be pieces of poetry, because poetry is important to me. And I jotted down a few things from my current notebook, things I'd put in the margins or above a drawing. The still point of the turning world, which is a quote from T.S. Eliot, a most marvelous poet. I'd love to do something with his poem, 4 quartets. I'd also written soon after that Lost Pearl, which is a medieval dream poem, which if nobody knows it, I highly recommend. It's most extraordinary. I think it's 14th century, where a pearl, lost pearl, represents a lost child. Then quite different, The Days of Used to Be is a Neil Young text. The Band, Across the Great Divide. These are things I wrote down which formed a sort of ongoing language, I suppose, in parallel to the visual language. The third work, which is in Cambridge, is it's on the Sidgwick site. It's a piece called Big Bite, and I suppose it's about 8 years old now. Sidgwick site is the law faculty in Cambridge. This is earlier, from I think it's about 1990. It's a sculpture called The View Within, and it's about 5.5 meters high. It's on the campus of the Essex University in Chichester. The related drawings, this is from about the same period, maybe a year earlier. All my drawings I work with in charcoal and either gouache or acrylic. And they're quite large. I suppose this one is about 1.5 meters high. And it relates to the previous sculpture in the sense that it's about internal spaces, voids, views through contrasting ellipses and rectangles and swapping around. The edges are convoluted. They're like parentheses, brackets, where they turn in, come out, turn in. So it's a sort of a dialogue of interior, exterior, inside space, outside space, light and dark, shade, and always the dust of the charcoal. A very recent drawing. A dust of the charcoal gives a ground, a bite on which the very precise, and sometimes I feel over-precise, forms that I'm drawn to can have a bit of breathing space. What interested me here is that the empty space of the two ellipses against the black ground are more dominant than the positive blue and black itself. They seem to exist as strongly as anything else in the drawing. But there's a great deal of preliminary drawing in my work, in the two-dimensional work. So all the sort of edges you see, like these points here, they're preliminary drawings in pencil till I get the sort of structure that I want. And then they're erased. And the act of erasure causes the paper to roughen a little bit. So when I shake the dust off and then I fix the dust, it picks up more strongly on those lines and gives a history of the making of the drawing and a bit of sense of context. This is a very recent drawing called Square Dance. It's about 2.5 meters square. So it's a substantial work in Corten steel. And it's ellipses which form verticals and horizontals. So a vertical hangs above a horizontal, which moves horizontally into a vertical, and so goes around the perimeter. It'll be shown in it's only been shown once, but it'll be shown at Oxford in June. I'm having a show at the Said Business School in June, if anybody's in Oxford. A recent drawing. So waxing and waning is another phrase I came across in my notebook. Deep secret, still, comma, silent, gateway, threshold, toward the light, call and response. And just yesterday, neither plenitude nor vacancy, which is a quote from Four Quartets, T.S. Eliot. Because emptiness, empty space, has always been important to me. Emptiness, interval, either in music or in architecture or in anything, pottery, is what makes the subject real. This is, I made a whole series of circle drawings. They were freehand drawings, made quite large, some of them, and then a true circle bounds it on the outside and on the inside. So there's a sort of rhythm occurs from the way that the hand draws a circle. And this was my first collaboration with Andrew Lambeth, the art critic and poet, with whom I collaborated on the portfolio that I've just finished with Kip Gresham. And this was done every year. He does a Christmas card. So this is the words for the card. I've done two with him. This is the second one. And his text. This is the, I think, quite handsome presentation box that the 12 prints come in, which the portfolio, all made in Cambridge, which is nice. The box was made here. The prints were obviously made here. So it's very much a Cambridge venture. 12 images, 12 poems. And that's the colophon, all the details about it. And it comes in, there are folders with the poem printed on the left and loose within it is the screen print. I think it might be possible to read, when I come to them, a few of the poems, which I think are beautiful. They were, somebody wrote a short paragraph. In fact, it was the curator at the New Arts Centre, Roche Court. I don't know if anybody knows, a beautiful sculpture park just outside Salisbury, where I show sculpture from time to time. And they're showing these works in Brussels at the moment. But the curator there wrote a nice passage about the way the prints work, that came about. They said the work developed simultaneously and organically, supporting each other's practice and vision. That's me and Andrew. The 12 prints and poems came out of conversations loosely based on the calendar months of our seasons of love and of loss. And that really was how they happened. It wasn't as though I tried to illustrate one of his poems, and neither did he try to write verse which corresponded to the image, but they were crossovers. We know each other quite well. We've worked together and enjoy each other's company. And so it really was quite an organic dialogue between the two of us. But this is a series of 12. And they are loosely based on the months of the year. So this is January. I think I could, I don't know whether is time, but I will read them because I think when you look at the imagery and you hear the words, I think there's a certain resonance between the two. So in January, dancing in the skies, the far sight lines of the metaphysical, yet it's midnight on the desert, and what do you take to pacify time? Oh, flints and cinders. Sorrow is personal, the universal somewhere else. There's an example in there of Andrew's kind of awareness of me, because I'm very fond of deserts. And when I was graduating from the Royal College a long time ago, I had the opportunity to have a fellowship to America. And you could choose anywhere you like to spend 2 years. Most artists went to New York, but I decided I would go to Los Angeles for 2 reasons. It was a big and exciting city, and it was within easy drive of the Mojave Desert. And the Mojave Desert was inspiring to me. I spent a lot of time. I didn't know what deserts were about. I'm from Gloucestershire, which is as far as you can get from a desert, really. It's a verdant and, totally climatically different, but I sensed desert would be good for me, and it was, because in desert I discovered those spaces, empty spaces, or spaces filled by wind, or the sound of wind. And I spent time walking and thinking and drawing, made a lot of drawings there. And on one occasion I spent time on a dry lake called Soda Lake. And Soda Lake is a vast expanse of dried salt, surrounded by distant mountains of beautiful colors usually, and changing throughout the day. And on one occasion I came across a rusty pipe sticking out of the ground. And it doesn't sound much, but in a desert, to come across a man-made object is quite different from seeing one in the middle of a town. There it seemed to be a strange and extraordinary object. And I took a stone and I dropped it. The pipe came to about this height and about sort of that diameter. And I dropped a stone which bounced off the side of the pipe. And after a second or two it hit water, which surprised me in the desert. And the sound of the water and the stone came bouncing back up. And I got this vision of a horizontal way below my feet, the perimeter of this desert, and the mountains ringing it, and the flatness, the verticality, built up an image, and it resulted in a sculpture called Soda Lake, which I foolishly didn't put in because I didn't think I'd be telling this story. But it's on my website. It's a piece from 1968, and I exhibited it in London a few years later. And quite a wonderful choreographer called Richard Alston came to the show and asked me if he could make a dance piece for it. And I said, wonderful. And he produced a solo, I think it was about 5 minutes, very short, no music, solo dance piece. And the first dancer to perform was Michael Clarke, who quite notorious in the dance world, wonderful dancer, and he's gone on now to have his own dance group. But that piece, Soda Lake, which now is in the Arts Council collection, well, there are three copies of it, but it was really an example of how landscape affected me, and how that the effect of that produced a sculpture, and then the sculpture itself fed back into a whole new experience. And when we talked about 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, and I facetiously said 4 dimensions, that is the 4th dimension. It was movement through space within that one sculpture. And as I said, that was 1968. So in titles of my work, places often important. So there's Soda Lake, there's Hidden Valley, which is it's not really called Hidden Valley, it's in the Upper Engadine in Switzerland. It's actually called the Fedots, but I kind of renamed it for myself as Hidden Valley because it was a very difficult place to get to in the winter. And when I did find it, it was up over a snowy rise, and then it suddenly opened out, and it was only visible from that one moment. And I made a series of sculptures called Hidden Valley. So the titles, when I talk about language is always important to me. From the title, I don't title drawings, I number drawings. I make too many drawings to think of titles for all my drawings. So, but the sculptures do have titles, and they can be evocative, they can be call and response to the recent title. Hidden Valley. Venetian Twist is a sculpture that's just been acquired by the Tate. It's a wood wall piece, and it is like a loop like this. It's like the infinity symbol, but it's got depth and asymmetry. And it evolved from... am I right for time? I'm running 10 minutes late? Oh, sorry. It comes from... I was spending some time in Venice. We were in Venice. 4 or 5 artists were invited to go to spend time, have fun in Venice, but then do some work when we got home and make work that could be auctioned. And they were auctioned to raise money for the English church in Venice. But I was watching the gondolas and gondoliers and their movement of their oar. They do a kind of a figure of 8, and that's to keep the boat... If you always do it from one side, you go around in circles if you didn't find some way of counteracting it. Anyway, that was the title of the piece. Anyway, I better move on a bit. So this is February. I won't read all of them, is that right? Okay. I'd like to read February, though. So this is February. Spring, still only a premonition, figures delicately in imagination. Winter's black buds, like notes in waiting, on the staves of boughs against a white, cold sky. They're very simple. They're almost like haikus, but they're not, obviously, but they're kind of spare, a bit like the drawings. I'll run through the this is March. What comes after February? March, yeah. I'll miss out reading that one. This is April. The duck and the drake rising together on 2 wings, not needing 4. Nesting together, nestling together, So grounded the one, so aspiring the other, the most perfect match in nature. And then in brackets he's written, apart from all the others. I wait for a line of words to cut across my path like a searchlight and offer an indication of the future course. Polish your singularity like a medal. The future needs it. Anyway, I'll just run through the rest of the months, and you'll get an idea of how they all work. The image is not an image, but a fact tempered by reality, like the sky measuring light at the equinox, or a river in spate dancing silver in gateway gravity. December. Oh well, we'll leave out that one. It's too moving. And this is November. And I did ask, he never likes to rhyme. You know, it's quite modern not to rhyme, is it? I don't know. I always say, why don't you ever rhyme? So he did this to tease me, I think. The leaves stick fast, flags to a mast, frost comes at last. Now the leaves are cast, and autumn is past. Actually, that's the one I should have had on the screen. Sorry, Andrew. And this is December. The year comes to an end, old and creased and grey, overwritten with experience, scrumpled with use, as loving as mud weighing down the climber's boots, as sad as champagne for one. Sorry to end on a down note, but there we go. Thank you. Thank you. Are we off?
Any questions?
With the colour in the drawings, are they done? Do you have colour associations in your mind, or are they just done aesthetically for that particular day and time?
Isn't it funny? This is a question I remember having when I was a student at the Royal College. Well, how do you choose your... And it's dogged me ever since. Very good question, but I can't really answer it. It comes from a sort of emotional response to the situation that I'm building at that moment. I went for a long time just making black and white or black and cream, but then I missed colour. I've always used colour. Sometimes in my sculptures I use colour, but I find it very difficult to give a reasoned kind of response. I'm sorry, but I do remember it. Hubert Dulwood, who was a very good sculptor, he asked me exactly that question about 1964. I couldn't answer it then, and I'm not much better at answering it now.
Any other questions? I had a quick question, bringing it back to printmaking. Do you have any sort of standout memories or comments on the process of translating from drawing to print through the magic hands of somebody sitting in the back row here?
Well, what I was most surprised by was how transformative it was, because one tends to think of it as a reproductive process, but it wasn't that. I mean, it is partly that, but it's a renewing of the idea, and it comes back to me so differently from the drawing itself. So that is the thing that I most most vividly remember, is how stunned and happy I was to see that it was a new experience, a new creature, if you like, not just the same thing, but reproduced a number of times. So for that, I thank them hugely, and all the hard, because it was a huge project, as you can imagine. 12 images, edition of 75. It's a lot of work, And I don't know much, I know very little, but I know now that the screen, there were, am I right, 10 or 11 screens, Kip? Each one. Well, do the maths, it's a lot of work. Yeah.
One very quick question.
Okay, I'll try to make it short. I mean, right from the start, when I saw your first drawings, I was struck by the aesthetic of it, where organic shapes, the circle comes off back. There's almost a spiritual element for me in it. Can you say a bit about that?
There's also always
There's a kind of spiritual element in it, in that perception, in that expression of yours.
well, it's a hard thing to talk about, but yes, I suppose I don't know quite where to start. When I was young, my childhood, I went to school in Bristol. I lived outside in the country, and I led quite a quiet, solitary life. And I spent a lot of time in fields and walking and making drawings of landscape. And when my work became more abstract, I didn't see any reason why I should stop making those observed drawings, if you like. But my observation always seemed to be quite meditative and quite contemplative. And then I discovered geometry. The geometry springs from the observation as well, because, you know, the geometry of landscape. But it was always one of, I didn't want to, it sounds pretentious way, but sort of communing with it, you know. And the drawings are still, my sculpture has a stillness. And one thing about sculpture is that it becomes alive and moving when you move, like landscape. If you walk through landscape, you know, things move in relation to your position. It's the same with sculpture, but when you stay still, then the sculpture is still and the landscape is still. And that's a moment of contemplation and meditation. I mean, Eliot talks about that, you know, the still center of the moving world. So the most extreme example, I suppose, is that circle, which and the bit, this one too. I hadn't realised there was a circle on but the earlier circle, which I did for the Andrew Lambeth card. Those are very much, they're the extreme point of contemplation. I think I should be, have I answered it a bit? Thank you very much. Thank you.